Okay guys, so welcome to a miserable day in Melbourne. So I just thought I'd take the opportunity now. All the guys have gone home because we all know the old saying, wet steel no deal. If you're interested in one of these t-shirts or hoodies, just click on the link in the description below. So we're not going to have anyone working up on the steel work while it's wet and a bit miserable out here. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to explain exactly what is dogging. If you're thinking to yourself, well, he's standing in a steel erection area, and that's basic rigging. Now, the reason I've done that, and I've done that deliberately, this wall behind me, this big wall here, now you might have seen the short I put up recently with this wall coming up. While yes, to do steel work you do have to be a basic rigger, the actual lift of putting this wall up was actually conducted by a Dogman. He wasn't actually installing the steel, but he was lifting it up. Now, I want to cover off what exactly a Dogman does. The main things a Dogman is responsible for is, first up, he needs to know the weight of the load. When we were looking at this big wall here, we said our thoughts was it's going to come up at about 3 tonne. So what we did, we allowed for it to come up at 4 tonne. That way you had a little bit of play up our sleeve. And as we were lifting it, if it did get near that 4 tonne mark, then we could put it back down and then we could readjust the weights. Okay, but we need to have some idea of what it's going to weigh first, and always err on the side of caution and just go that little bit above. Guessing it was going to go 4 tonne, well, guessing it was going to go 3 and allowing for 4. We ended up using 10mm chains. They're going to be good for 5.5 tonne, but because they were choked around the top, that's going to reduce them to just a bit over 4 tonne. Now, as he was lifting it up, the crane driver's just watching the load, and if it does get near that 4 tonne mark, then we were able to just put it back down, go for something a little bit bigger, just to be sure. Alright, so that's the first role of the Dogman, is to find out what the weight of the load is. Next thing a Dogman has to do is, once he knows the weight of the load, well, that's then going to allow him to select what lifting gear he needs. So allowing for 4 tonne, that's why we went for our 10mm chains. So we got our chains. Obviously the next thing we have to do is we have to inspect our lifting gear. So we make sure we check the whole set of the chains. We start the lifting ring, we check the hammer locks, we check the shorteners, we can check the chains, we can check the hooks. Now if you want to know how to check it, just check out my video on collecting and inspecting lifting gear. If you're not sure on that, just pop over to that other video and have a look once you've finished this one. We've found out the weight of the load, we've selected our lifting gear, we've inspected our lifting gear. We also need to communicate the weights to the crane operator, which we obviously did before we started, and that way he knew to watch his load cell as it was coming up, so that if it did come close, then we could just readjust. So communicating with the operator is another important part of dogging. Once we've got all that in place, what we're going to do is we are then going to start directing the crane. So that is essentially the role of a Dogman. So if you just cover off those tasks, so that's finding out the weight of the load, which then allows you to select your lifting gear, which you will then inspect your lifting gear. Once you've done that, then you're going to sling the load. So using the correct slinging techniques. Once it's slung, communicate with the crane operator, and then you can start directing the crane. Now all that can be done as a Dogman. Once it actually got up here and we actually needed to get those podges and start pinning the steel, that's where it came into the role as a basic rigger. Alright, so I hope that helps you understand the difference between a Dogman and a rigger. To lift the steel work you don't have to be a basic rigger, but to start installing it you do. Alright, so hope to see you on the next video. Thanks for your time.